Hi everyone, I'm Matt from Looking to Bitcoin, and today we're going to be looking at whether a Bitcoin ETF is actually bullish. To do this, we'll be using a number of resources that are all freely available on lookintobitcoin.com, your number one source for Bitcoin information. And if you haven't already, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to ensure you're receiving all of our content as soon as it's released. So right now we're just on the Bitcoin live price page here on lookintobitcoin.com, and for now we're just going to focus on one small stat, which is the Bitcoin market cap, which currently, as I film this, sits at just beneath $570 billion. So not pocket change, but not as massive as many other products that maybe are traded and invested globally. And one way a lot of traders and investors actually gain exposure to different markets is through something called exchange traded funds. Now, if you weren't already aware, a number of different institutions are actually trying to launch a Bitcoin ETF. Now, this has been rumored and in talks for as many years as I can really remember. Everyone kind of expecting an ETF to be approved, but constant rejections has made it more of a pipe dream really than a reality over the past few years. But if you weren't already aware, BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, recently filed a Bitcoin ETF application that has got many people rather bullish on the potential future of Bitcoin price. Because being the largest asset manager in the world, potentially over $10 trillion worth of assets, really might have a massive influence on the Bitcoin price, especially when we consider, like we said, the market cap being potentially less than 20 times that of the assets under management of BlackRock. So what is this BlackRock ETF aiming to do? Well, it's aiming to just give lots of traders and investors easier access to invest in the cryptocurrency space and really to gain exposure to Bitcoin. Within a lot of traditional investing, it's really hard to maybe get the regulatory approval to invest in spot Bitcoin, and there's other complications that have led to people potentially investing in alternate ways to potentially get some exposure with companies such as MicroStrategy or Coinbase. But really, a Bitcoin ETF would give these investors direct exposure to the cryptocurrency market, which would be great for either investing for the long term or maybe just as a diversification play. But either way, it's likely going to bring a lot of capital inflows to the cryptocurrency market, which, like we said, is getting people rather bullish on the potential that we could see for Bitcoin. Now, very recently, we actually did see another Bitcoin ETF, which was submitted by ARK, who is run by Kathy Woods, and that actually got delayed. So there is a lot of optimism about an ETF being approved, but we're actually yet to see any concrete evidence that this is going to do so. But as well as the capital inflows, that'll likely bring a lot of traders and investors into the cryptocurrency markets where they previously would have either struggled to do so or maybe just weren't willing to do so because of the complications. We can see that historically, ETFs have been rather bullish. We can look at something like when gold first had an ETF approved. So we can see down here that gold really first had its big ETF launch in 2003. So if we just go to the gold chart here, this is just the standard gold chart. What we can do is actually overlay when this gold ETF was launched, this gold bullion services, and see that when this was launched, it actually had a rather exponential reaction in the price of gold. We can see from almost exactly the moment it was launched, we saw a massive increase in the price of gold from around $400 all the way up to nearly $2,000 in a near non-stop bull run that lasted almost a decade. So I think a lot of people are expecting maybe a similar reaction in the Bitcoin price if a Bitcoin ETF were to be approved. We can look at some other instances where Bitcoin products were launched that maybe gave people the idea that we'd have a very bullish reaction in price, but maybe they didn't quite live up to expectations. So firstly, we have the GBTC, which is the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. Now, this was launched again as an initial way for people to try and gain some easier exposure to Bitcoin in the cryptocurrency markets. But as we can see, this Grayscale Bitcoin Trust has actually massively underperformed compared to Bitcoin since its launch in 2015. We can see Bitcoin at its peak rallied to around a 30,000% profit from when this was initially launched, whereas the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust managed only a measly 13,500%. But we can see here that now this is a huge divergence of underperformance from this Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, because ultimately we still don't have the details regarding a lot of these ETF submissions, and really if they're not holding underlying spot BTC, if they're not actually collateralized with real Bitcoins, it's hard to know if this will actually have a bullish impact on price. For example, we can look at when the Bitcoin futures were first launched. on December 17th, 2017. Now, a lot of people, again, in anticipation to this, were a little bit bullish that maybe with this launch, that maybe a lot of traders and investors from traditional markets would come into the crypto and Bitcoin space to potentially buy these futures contracts to bet on the Bitcoin price increasing further. But if we actually look at to where the December 17th futures date was, it marked the exact top for the Bitcoin bull market, and following that we had a multi-year downwards price action. So this wasn't actually the bullish event people really anticipated it was going to be. And like I said, any derivative style contracts, whether they're ETFs, whether they're futures contracts, anything like that, really takes away a little bit from the actual meaning of Bitcoin. This is purely profit driven. Of course, like we said, people may be diversifying, maybe using Bitcoin as a hedge is their intention, but really any capital outflows from the underlying Bitcoin network isn't really in the right spirit of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, at least in my opinion. If we look at something like the whale shadows, what we could see as potentially we get many large players within the cryptocurrency space, or maybe we're considering investing or diversifying into the crypto space, maybe they would prefer to use these ETFs for simplifications in their tax returns, and that would lead to potentially less network utilization for Bitcoin, and it would lead to potentially more people using leverage, betting on derivatives, and really a stagnation in the underlying Bitcoin market, which isn't really what we want to see. Really, the ideal way to actually implement this ETF if it was backed by real Bitcoins, which as far as I can tell, we don't know the actual details of how this ETF is going to be formed just yet. So maybe that is the case. Maybe this is going to be the bullish event that we're all expecting and hoping it's going to be. But like I said, we really need to be cautious considering anything that is made to mimic Bitcoin, as it's not actual Bitcoin. There is the famous saying, not your keys, not your coin, and that has historically held very true, and I imagine will continue to hold very true going forward. So just to summarize, with a number of new Bitcoin ETFs or exchange traded funds being submitted, many traders and investors are optimistic about a bullish reaction in the Bitcoin price following a potential approval. We've seen a recent submission by ARK being delayed, but again, a lot of people are actually quite optimistic that we are going to see an approval, potentially by BlackRock, which is definitely the most substantial submission we've seen so far. And a Bitcoin ETF would likely pave the way for huge capital inflows from large market participants and institutions, with many drawing comparisons to the positive reaction in the gold price we saw following that 2003 approval. So again, it makes sense that people are very optimistic regarding this ETF. It likely will result in more inflows and at least more interest in the Bitcoin markets. But many were also optimistic when Bitcoin futures were initially released, which coincided with a Bitcoin price peak. So anything that isn't actually using spot underlying Bitcoins, it isn't collateralized by anything. Is this actually better than fiat currencies? I know it's made to mimic the price, so potentially the profit potential is the same, but really we need to be wary of anything that is a derivative. Like we said, not your keys, not your coin. So maybe just consider all possibilities whenever an ETF approval comes up in the topic of conversation. Like I said, I'm personally quite optimistic, but we do need to be wary. If you like this video, then please visit lookintobitcoin.com, where you can also consider becoming a site subscriber to gain access to live chats, in-depth newsletters, indicator alerts, private TradingView scripts, and more, all for a fraction of the standard industry price. And come September, we actually have loads of cool new charts, features, and pretty much everything you can imagine going live. So definitely stick around, check out the site, and really get excited for all the new stuff we have coming out. And let me know in the comments down below and on social media, what are your thoughts regarding the Bitcoin ETF? Do you think it's going to be a bullish catalyst for the Bitcoin price? Or again, are you being a little bit more cautious before getting your hopes up too high before we even have an approval finalized? Again, let me know. I look forward to reading and replying to all of them. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.